MINDBEND, non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for MINDBEND Creative.
You said that you're willing to engage in mystical conversations with me today, Kat.
I am. That's one of my favorite parts about the psychedelic experience.
And is it part of our experience that's not psychedelic too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the mystical is, people have it spontaneously, randomly, and I think there's not a willingness to talk about it because I think a lot of people feel like, oh my God, somebody is going to think I'm crazy. What if they don't believe me? They think I have like schizophrenia. If they're like having different kind of experiences outside of like the realm of normal. And it's just, for me, what could be more exciting than the mysterious?
Well, we have things that happen to us that are not normal. We've all been through something in the last couple of years that is easily considered not normal, right? So I think a lot of what's happening right now in the world of psychedelics and the role that psychedelics have sort of assumed in the zeitgeist is based in part on our reality being upended and changed so much. But mystical always has intrigued me.
Yeah.
Part of it for me was growing up as a Catholic and being involved in receiving sacraments and learning about these ethereal concepts, which for me entailed a lot of imagination.
Yeah.
To me, imagination is still a huge word. It's still a very valuable part of my human experience. So I'm never reticent to talk about mystical or imagination or anything that has to do with whatever's not considered normal.
I mean, the imagination, look around, right? We're in this beautiful studio right now, and everything that we're seeing is because of an idea. It's because of imagination. At some point, we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could record our audio and then had it forever for other people to hear? And then like somebody's like, yeah, but it has to start always from a thought or the imaginary plane. And, you know, that is, I think, where all the creation happens, you know, from this point. And so that couldn't be more exciting. And also the idea of like, where does that idea come from is always the thing that like trips me out. Like, okay, I'm just walking around and then suddenly like the germ of an idea just like drops in. I'm like, did my brain just do that? Like what happened there? Like, why now? Why did I suddenly get that idea? And then suddenly the energy then to go after it. Now that's the other thing, right? I think a lot of us get the idea and then doubt and fear and, well, how am I going to do that? Oh, it's a good idea, but like the steps to actually create it. I mean, how many times, at least for myself, I'll look at something and be like, I thought of that idea like 4 years ago, but like here it is. Someone actually did it. I was like, yeah, because I feel like those ideas, I feel like it's also in the collective unconscious, right? Where, or this collective conscious that we're all connected to. Because if you look at, you know, I remember when you'll see it a lot in film, right? Like you'll see Snow White had its moment for a little bit. They came out with Mirror Mirror. There was like 1, 2, or 3 other Snow White films. Apparently they had no clue that they were being made. They weren't trying to create competition in the Snow White realm. Same thing with The Illusionist, or I want to say, is it the Protege? No. Do you know
The Prestige.
Prestige. Okay, suddenly all of this, it's like somehow in that zeitgeist, there's ideas. And if some people are going to move on them and some people aren't. And it's like, I feel like that we all get met with that little bit of spark. And then it's up to us to move.
Were you a mystical toddler?
I wish I remember being a toddler. I would like to believe I was. When I hear back,
Anything under 13 or 14, I'm referring to a kid.
Were
you a
mystical kid? You know, I would have some weird daydreams. So I wouldn't know if it was even mystical. I wouldn't call it that. Like I would pretend, I can't believe I'm saying this on like a podcast. I would pretend that I was a lion, like in a lion's cub, like a lion's like. And I would almost like, this is when I was like 6 or 7, I would like literally like walk and move as if I was in this lion pride and like just, and I feel like there was a connection. It was, to me, it felt beyond imagination. Like, oh, I'm being a lion. Like the adult cat would just be like, here I am pretending to be a lion. But when I was young, there was an actual like embodiment of, now I'm this animal, this like regal animal, and I'm just was always so fascinated by them. And to me, there's like these, it allowed me to be in realms, I think, when I was young in my imagination that didn't feel, I wouldn't have called it imagination. It was just part of like being an open-minded kid. Did I have experiences necessarily like with like ghosts or paranormal stuff? I have one experience where like I still to this day don't know what it was when I was a kid, but I know a lot of kids do. You know, I don't remember imaginary friends. I wish I did. You know, I love when I hear that with kids. I love when I was like, because to me, I was like, well, then how do we know? Like, we don't really know what's happening there. It's like a hypothesis, like it's an imaginary kid, or like, or maybe not. You know, it's to me, that's very 50-50. We don't know either way. So yeah, I mean, that's how I describe it, as like my imagination was really big, but I wouldn't describe myself as like mystical.
So you're drawing a line between imagination and mystical or mysticism. You've got a delineation there.
Well, it seems like it, but like, I guess when you say it that way to me, like, I don't think that they're that different. You draw on similar aspects, but I guess what I'm trying to say is more as an adult, I would say like I've had some now what I would call like transcendent mystical type experiences, channeling experiences, seeing things that just I can't unsee what I saw with my eyes, like that.
What you saw with your eyeballs.
With my actual eyeballs.
Actual eyeballs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's like, and before that even, it was like, I had a spontaneous, what I would call like a mystical awakening. I was already on a spiritual path though. And what I mean by that is like, now I'm reading books around the ego mind and the soul, like the seed of the soul, and kind of understanding myself better, because I think that is part of the spiritual. We're all spirit, right? We're all just people. We're all having a spiritual experience in some way. And I think it was just the exploration now of like deeper, like, what am I? Why am I here? What am I doing here? Like really some of that deeper stuff is what really drove me into certainly my own connection to something that beyond, words, nature, everything, like the connective tissue to everything to me is such a miraculous experience. And I didn't have that viewpoint though. I didn't think of the world that way really until my psychedelic journey began. That didn't really begin until, shout out to mushrooms and ayahuasca for whether it's on a scientific level, taking away the judge, right, the prefrontal cortex, and allowing me to suddenly take in so much more raw data in my surroundings. But yeah, it started with really mushrooms that I began to connect to myself and to what I would call just like a presence with a capital P that just permeates everything. And the more that I would get curious around, what am I feeling that I can't perceive? I get that there's something that I feel, but I can't. There's no words for it. I can't intellectualize it. What is that? And that's really been the thing that has, brought like so much magic to my life. And I don't mean this in a religious way. I didn't grow up religious. I don't think of it as dogma in any way. And so I like to say that too, just because I know when I say divine and things, that word God, I'll say everyone's got their own definition of that. And so
I want to hear about your overtly mystical experiences that you've had through utilizing psychedelic compounds. So to whatever extent you're willing to share, I think that would be, enjoyable for the listener and the viewer to sort of go on that ride with you if you want to share some experiences.
Yeah, totally. And what I always like to say with this is like, one, you can never know without experience, right? Everything is intellectual. Everything is through the mind. Everything's intellectual. If you're going to hear my story and it might be cool, it might resonate, it might be just like, okay, she obviously went through something. But the first place that I like to say, and I like to say this about psychedelics too, is like, not that I say everyone should go out and try a psychedelic if for the whole world, a blanket statement, because I don't think they're necessarily right for everyone. But you can hear all about the psychedelic experience, and until you have it, you'll never really know it. And it's the same thing with spirituality and mystical experiences. And so I just want to put that like a caveat on here.
And we always consider that anybody listening to this or watching this or finding this somewhere, it could be a parent who's found out that their child had tried LSD recently or something, and they wound up like finding this on YouTube or dialing into it on Apple Podcasts or whatever. Or it could be somebody with a lot of experience that's just looking to hear something familiar or comforting. We always are prepared to offer information to a wide array of experiencers, right? And backgrounds and temperaments.
Yeah.
And you relaying some anecdotes in detail is not anything other than being vulnerable, which I think I want this space to be an incubator for an empowered expression of vulnerability, right? Because that's kind of what I feel is something that I'd like to sort of help contribute to this world if possible, right? Totally. But always, like... the most Hollywood aspect of it is hearing about the color and hearing about the shape and hearing about the out of the ordinary kind of thing. Because really what we're talking about with the nature of a trip is something that's far out of the ordinary. And what you were talking about earlier with the delineation between imagination and mystical seemed to indicate that if you're imagining something, you have agency in it, you control it. If it's mystical, it's sort of happening to you, or it's unforeseen and unplanned, right? So if that's correct, that was my impression of what you were saying. So we're maybe talking about mystical experiences when we're talking about these trips where you had no immediate like planning or right control of it.
There was no like directing the experience by nature. Certainly not the conscious version of myself. It is a higher aspect of myself orchestrating, probably.
Yeah.
But certainly no, like I wasn't like seeking it out in any way.
Yeah.
And so, I'll take you through. So the first time that things started to get weird, the time things started to get weird, I was at my friend's house. We would watch a show. He had this amazing, immaculate show, and we would take magic mushrooms for the experience and a little bit of MDMA sometimes, so to like help ground the experience.
But he had an immaculate show?
Yeah. Oh my God. It's like, it was like an audio visual fucking.
Oh, he created a container for an experience.
Yeah, and it was in his studio at his beautiful home. And we would like literally lose our minds like watching this. We'd be like, there's lots of fractal patterns, but there's also dancing, and there's also, there's just like a ton of amazing stuff. And so we would watch this. And so my psychedelic experiences, aside from my first trip at 16, which like did not go well, my second trip was like just a lot of emotion, and I was like, cool, wasn't bad, but I don't need to do that again for like at least a year. But it wasn't until the third time, which was at my friend's house for this show. We were in a small group.
Third time as an adult.
As an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Technically, second time as an adult. It's third time total. We took it with a little MDMA, and that's when I finally got the aha around psychedelics. I was like, oh my God, like, wow. And the thing is like, what I always like to say is like, I was pairing, now during this time, pairing my psychedelic experiences with so much joy and fun and laughter and community. And I got to feel the wonder and the bliss of being alive. I never knew how wonderful life could feel. I had thought I reached peak moments in my life. I was 31 by this point. I've done lots of fun, cool things in my life, but never until I started to pair basically my psychedelic experience with the experience of joy, which is why I understand why people love going to festivals.
What about getting blitzed on alcohol?
To me, that you completely black out, you numb, you feel like shit.
Was it part of your joy routine though?
Never.
It wasn't.
Never.
So you didn't go to a big festival and drink it up ahead of time. Did you smoke pot until you were seeing double?
No. I honestly, my like blacking or browning out or getting drunk days where I'm like, I'm getting drunk, ended around, I want to say like 29. I started to move into like ecstasy more around 30 to about 31, like about 2 years where I was like, I'd rather just roll and have some water. Like that was actually just a more fun experience. I'm like, maybe I'd have a drink or two. But for me, MDMA was actually my first. I don't even really consider it like a classical psychedelic in that way. It feels amazing. It's great for dancing. This is why it's been in the rave scene for as long as it has. But that was actually my first foray into it. And so what MDMA did for me was the same. It was very similar in the way that I was like, not only am I having way more fun than alcohol could have ever done, but I remember my night. I'm so connected in this loving space with everyone around me. I wouldn't just like casually take ecstasy, right? It would be like I'm going to a show. I love electronic music. And so I was going to go dance. So I'd be dancing all night long. Like I never in my 20s ever had that much fun. Just like dancing as hard as I could possibly dance in my own body and laughing and looking around and connecting to all of these smiling, happy faces, cheering back to the DJ, feeling like this in this split second, we are so connected to, in this case, music. That's why I feel like live music is such an important aspect of being alive, which is why it's been through cultures. And it's from the beginning of time, we've been playing, whether it's on drums, right? Like there's something very communal and spiritual about that experience. And so that's where it went next after alcohol.
Did you think you weren't capable of immersing yourself and seeing smiling faces and feeling joy and being connected to music without something like MDMA in your system?
So what's interesting is, again, like I thought alcohol was that thing for me. It allowed me to be like, loose. I wasn't self-conscious. And it was more like getting lost in oblivion. And like, yes, I might dance and have fun, but it's a blur. I'm blurring out any like thoughts of, not only am I not connected, I'm disconnecting actually from the ego, the self-conscious part of myself that's like, oh, I'm gonna dance this hard. So it was really just now I'm just gonna put like a blur, like think of like the blur behind a picture, like that's me. And then like I'm like dancing, like that was the alcohol.
The reason a lot of people utilize alcohol in situations like that. Yeah,
totally. And like that's what I knew. And there was something very freeing about that at the time. We find what we find at the right time. Alcohol served its purpose, no doubt. I had fun with it. It was great. And, it also just the way that I felt, it really wasn't serving by the time I started hitting my late 20s. I was like, this is...
Physiologically.
Yeah, physiologically. Yeah. Like I'd feel so down. Like I'd feel depressed the next day. I was like, is this worth it? Like, I don't know. MDMA happened to like come to me through like, it was like a birthday. A friend took me to a show and he's like, I got this Tesla. And I took a half and I was like very floored. I didn't know what to do with myself. And then it just opened up my capacity for feeling in general. And what that does, I always say it's not about the rolling at that time. What it showed me is the capacity of how much I can love and how much I could feel and how much I can connect. Because at that point, once you don't know what you don't know. So I had never reached a space where I could actually connect to that level, to feel so much excitement. I had never felt that. I didn't know that I could. You don't know what you don't know. And then it opens it up. Then off an MDMA experience, then I know, oh, I don't necessarily need that to get there, but this is how much is available in you. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That was one time. You have no idea the extent of how you can feel. Like how amazing this human vessel can be. As somebody who's had a hip replacement and knee surgeries, like I know pain very well, physical pain. I've also known a lot of mental, like, whether it's anxiety or depression or just grief that's happened in my life. Like we all know humans, if anything, we know the difficulty maybe more than we know the bliss. And so when you know that there's something that can actually assist with that and show you, oh yeah, remember how amazing it is to be here? Whew, it's something.
A lot of people hear about the therapeutic use of psychedelics and the way it's talking about the changing landscape for medicine, right? And the conversation around who's controlling the space and how legislation moves and how it's viewed by, people who are unfamiliar with it. You were speaking about something being implemented to change a state of mind that could be self-destructive or destructive towards others potentially by allowing a viewpoint to occur that's more supportive, creative, love-based, life-affirming, right?
Yeah.
Talking about reduction in suicidality. We're talking about processing trauma. In your instance, it was helping your latent joy to expand in a way that wasn't provoked or promoted by traditional methods that you had utilized before and that had grown physiologically taxing over time.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. Exactly. And I think to that point, you know, something that I talk about certainly on my own podcast is just there's so many ways to experience a psychedelic and that everything has a place, a time and a place. Just like know your set and setting, know what your intention is. But for me personally, you know, I've had some of the most extraordinary experiences on a psychedelic at a festival experience, for instance. But that for me is, you know, for me, it's not about like, I'm getting fucked up. That is the ultimate connection for me. And I'm always intentional. My intention is to have fun, to connect with my friends, to connect with everyone here, and to make love to the beat. Like, that's what my intention is. Why does it, we're all trying to not be depressed or not be anxious, but like, what are we trying to be? We trying to have fun? We trying to play? We trying to feel love and awe and wonder? It's like, it's always like the thing that we don't want instead of like, what do we want? And what do you want to feel in this life? And what's wrong? You know, I think, and maybe you tell me as somebody who's grown up religious, like this idea of like, is pleasure a bad thing? Should we not feel bliss in this human experience? Should we not feel how wonderful it is? Mm-hmm. And I think there's maybe a deeper question around that. Some of us really welcome play and fun. And, you know, there's definitely, that's who's going to festivals and that's who's going to shows. And I think there's going to be probably a subset of people that feel somehow a level of guilt around, should I feel so much fun and joy and bliss around this human experience? Do I need to suffer through this bitch? You know, And well, I think that's a bigger thing.
It's a huge thing. And I think something that's important is thinking about nature and nurture and a young human being raised with a sense of the value of celebration of your experience, right? And I think a lot of people just don't get that because our world can be such a mess. Mm-hmm. So if you have an inclination to celebrate, and then the celebration just turns so toxic too, especially with overindulgence and substance and the way that alters your mood and behavior and for ways that aren't like enlightened or loving or productive, right? But I often think about how much wellness are we supposed to be experiencing? You know, like what is the optimal wellness? And it's just this sort of ephemeral quality. But all of this stuff is so obtuse. We're talking about mental health a lot of the time. I want to steer us back to your experience of the trip and your friend's 3D Cavern of Delights. But we're talking about this concept that's so hard, even for physicians that I speak to, clinicians and psychiatrists, the psyche and moderating it and medicating it and optimizing it, a highly personal experience of life. What a wild mess. Let me steer you back to talking about taking psilocybin and MDMA at the same time and watching fractals. You decided to do that and you knew it was going to get wild. Like you wanted to go in and have kind of a wild experience.
So I wanted to have a fun experience. You know, a friend of mine, I didn't know what I was going to experience actually, because a friend of mine just said, he basically didn't tell us. We just knew he was excited about something he wanted to show us.
After you'd been taking MDMA for a little bit.
I had been taking MDMA, but this is the first time I've taken mushrooms again now.
Okay.
Really, the second time as an adult. And this time I felt really ready though. For whatever reason, you know, I think I was already, you know, my soul, it was like that, the clock. It was ready to now have a deeper relationship with mushrooms at this time. And
also maybe making a livable wage, maybe having an apartment that had heating and running water and
helped.
And yeah, like you felt maybe like you were in a stable point in your life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and exactly, because actually the first time I did mushrooms as an adult, I had just left a job actually. So to your point, that was a little bit of an unstable time.
Part of set and setting.
I was in a beautiful setting. It was in a beautiful setting. We were in Joshua Tree. But yeah, my set was, I had never really dealt with just life You know, like it's not, I had never gone to therapy, and I was somebody who would always say like, I'm fine. I'm very well functioning. And even though it was always so quick for me to cry, I would just remember that. Like, it was always so quick for me to cry. And I had always like, I was still like self-aware enough to be like, what's wrong, Kat? Like, what's going on? But I couldn't pinpoint it. You know, I couldn't pinpoint it. And the thing too, like I like to say with like psychedelics is like, I didn't understand that I was in a low grade depression my entire life because it was just baseline. That's just how I felt. And so I thought, oh yeah, that's just how life feels. And I think a lot of people probably have that too, is like, you, again, like we don't, if baseline is whatever it is, then we know what the peaks and valleys is from that. But if baseline is actually low grade, but you don't know any different and you just call it life, and it seems when you look around that everybody else seems to have a low grade depression too, then like you don't know, you can't compare yourself. And like I knew, like I had a few people that were like, you know, really suffering from mental health. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm doing better, you know, like in that way. Like I don't suffer quite in the same way. And so that's all.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by low grade depression that stuck around for years and years and years?
So the feeling of like passion and wanting to be so excited about life really like felt like it should have been in a reality for me. And it wasn't, you know, I didn't know what I was passionate about, and I didn't know where I was going. I felt like I was meant to experience something more, but like I didn't know what it was. And I used to always look at astronauts, for instance, and be like, God, it must be so cool to like, you're like 7 years old, you're like, I'm gonna be an astronaut. And then one day you get to go to space, and like to have that singular focus to being like, that is what I'm passionate about, and that's what I'm gonna do. And like, boom, trajectory, right? And I was like, cool, must be nice, you know, like to know what you want to do and to do it like that. I thought I wanted to do like a couple things. My first kind of like dream was dashed. I wanted to be the one to create a marketing concepts for movies, like the big idea. Anyway, long story short, I was called a creative director, and I had like no background in that, zero. And they're like, you can do like commercial endorsements. I'm like, okay, that's not the same as what I want to do. So I ended up being a talent agent or like kind of like a junior agent at CAA. And I told myself through lots of cognitive dissonance that I want to be an agent. I want to be a talent agent. And of course I missed every sign, everything about the only thing I liked about the job was saying what I did. Like everything else, I didn't really like to even to read scripts that much. Like I didn't want to be in the whole Hollywood scene. I lived in the South Bay. Like I did every self-sabotaging thing. To say somebody wants to be an agent, everything I did though was like in opposition to actually becoming the agent. But like again, like even in this like false, like I think I'm living my dream, there was like no, I was in just fear, constant fear, and just feeling scared to make a mistake and I didn't trust myself to make the right decision. And always, you know, and I'd have these like peak moments. I always had a lot of friends. So I'd always have like lots of friends, and I would go out on weekends. And so I just live for the weekend. And I was like, so is life about filling time? That's what I felt like. Am I just filling time every day? And then I have these like peak moments in life, and like, that's it. We live for the peak instead of we live for the day. And I was just living for the peak because the day was unsatisfactory for me, you know? And it was just, I didn't have the wherewithal or the awareness to even know what to do with that yet. And it wasn't until I was about in my early 30s that I kind of hit that crisis point of being like, is this it? Is this all we're doing? If this is it, this is unsatisfactory, and I don't know what to do with that. Like, I have a lot more life to live here. Not saying I was suicidal, but just like this feeling of like that's where the depression cloud was like, oh my God, if it's just this, like I just go to work and I get stressed about a job that for a brand that isn't helping anyone. And yet I'm staying up until 2 a.m, giving my life and soul to this brand that is just pouring. It means nothing to like the greater thing. And like, that's when I sat with ayahuasca.
Oh, that was the first time.
Yeah. And I basically like came to her on my hands and knees Like, please put me on the path.
Somebody advised you that you feel like your life is upside down and unfulfilling. You should try this.
So not exactly. I had known about ayahuasca, and for the few years I'd known about it, it was a no for me. I was like, nope, that sounds scary. I don't want to throw up. Whatever. It wasn't time.
Yeah.
And I had spoken, I was at a friend's birthday, saw his medicine woman, and she was just talking about the experience, and I just knew that ayahuasca had found me that night. I was listening to her, and like my soul was just like lighting up, like, yes. Like, it's time for you to like let go of the controls, because you don't know what you're doing. So like, why are you so insistent on being the driver when you don't know where you're going, girl? So it's like, allow something else now. Allow something else. And this was the beginning of really like my spiritual path, because for me, I always thought I had to do everything. If I didn't do it, if I wasn't the one up until 2 a.m., if this, everything would fall apart. There was this feeling of like, I'm doing it all alone. If I can't do it myself. And so this like level of control, and even though I wouldn't call myself controlling of others, I was always trying to control the outcome. Even like with dates that I would go on, like if I didn't want to go, like I would create such like a scenario around how I didn't want to, and like I would just like create so much. I would just block myself because I didn't want to feel something uncomfortable or whatever, and it was just not allowing myself to just be in the moment and like trust myself at all. And so that's when like ayahuasca like kind of like, and I knew when I said yes to that experience, like the ceremony began even before that.
Yeah.
And the surrender and real fear is coming up. Real fear and excitement, like excitement for something new and hope. But also, this is actually a good story before I get into my mystical stuff, because it's actually a really important part for context. So I'm glad that we got here. So when I sat with ayahuasca, I won't go into the full journey. It actually was very, I couldn't, colors and feelings, and I had some takeaways that I won't go into, but the few things I did feel is like I was laughing really hard at one point. I was moaning sensually. I was just like feeling so much joy. I was going through like all of the range of emotion. And the thing is there was no thought that was giving it to me, right? There wasn't like a funny thought or a pleasurable thought. It was just literally like the energy of pleasure, the energy of laughter, and nothing was creating that for me, right? And so after the experience, the next day I was at the beach, I had been sobbing all day, and I just wrote in the sand, I wrote, I love you. And to have you could see it on an Instagram quote, right? Oh, self-love, it's so important. But to have the real experience of that, to the recognition that like all that pleasure and the laughter and everything wasn't given to me by anyone else but myself. Like I gave that to me. That was inside of me, obviously with the help of ayahuasca, but like I had always been looking outside of myself for love, for partnership, for friendship, for information. Everything was outside of me. And that kept me in a perpetual state of loneliness. I was so lonely up until that point. So deeply lonely. I'd call my mom like well into my late 20s. Like, I'm so like, can I come over? I'm lonely. Like, I feel like I'd always like yearn for like a soul that I couldn't find in this life. And it was this massive healing around the person that I knew so well was me. And it began this journey in. And so the journey in really was then this 2019 time that first it was just around lots of contemplation and exploration and reading and crying and bubble baths and going off of dating apps and asking myself questions and sitting in silence and like getting deeply uncomfortable with myself to figure out like, what do you need to be happy, Kat? Okay, like it's now no more. How can I get it? What one more club, one more date? Is that going to do it? And so it became this like commitment to myself in 2019. And that brings me now to my friend's story in the middle of 2019, now I'm already on the path. It's about 8 months now on this like self-love path. And I think this is why the mushrooms, I was really ready too, because I had been already like ready to receive. You know, I was ready to receive myself fully, myself, the good, bad, all of it, you know?
Let me interrupt here just to put it one mundane question, which I think is kind of important when we're talking about these larger picture topics. You were working a job, buying groceries, supporting your life. You were having a life, right? You were doing what was necessary to just keep going while you were having these contemplative moments and the bubble baths and the reading and so you were doing what was necessary to keep yourself afloat.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when we hear anecdotes like this, it seems like they exist in a different world outside of the world necessary function. You know, whether you're a brother or you're a mother or you're a bogged down coworker or whatever, right? Like these kinds of revelations must occur within the context of a survival atmosphere.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. And I was. And I was that bogged down coworker during this time and figuring out, how do you not be that bogged down coworker? How do you create boundaries for yourself? How do you self-love doesn't matter if your team didn't get you this document, why are you waiting up till 2 a.m? Why are you what is this martyrdom vibe you got going on? Like really examining aspects of self within the context of life. I mean, that's where the spiritual stuff is like, where in your life are you, bleeding out energy, or who are you, the people that you're spending time with, how do you feel after that? This job is not serving. And that's which became very apparent more in November of 2019 was, this ain't it for you, girl. But it wasn't like, I'm going to abandon ship now, and that's what I like to say too, is like, I set the intention. And so, in basically July 2020, mushrooms, this experience. And now I'm experiencing all of this, like I'm experiencing awe and wonder and heart opening to the point that I've never experienced before. Community, best friends, like.
Did we skip over the cave with the animations and the movies?
No, that's all during this. So
okay.
we're watching something, but we're also hanging out with each other and we're talking and we're laughing.
You made it a point to try psilocybin mushrooms.
We were always tripping for this experience.
Okay.
Because it was literally, he made it for a psychedelic experience.
But during the pandemic so that was part of the context also, is that we're going to go on a trip outwards, inwards within this crazy time.
Well, it was 2019 that it really was like the bulk of it. The 2020 stuff, we did do some, but like obviously not in the beginning, not when it was like really like locked down.
Yeah. And
we would do like individuals with them. So I'll kind of get into it, because that's where the mystical began to happen was. So we're watching the show, we're tripping, it's 2019, and I remember I had set the intention. One day I just had the thought, right? The idea drops in, I'm watching the show, and all of a sudden I think, I can do anything that I want. Anything. And I was like, huh. And I'm like, it startled me because like, I'm not the person that would think I could do anything I want. I put myself in a big, large box of what I could and couldn't do. Like all the things here, this is my education. This is how smart I am. This is this is all the things here's my work experience. I'm just being logical. This is what I can probably do in this life. Okay. Like that's how I thought, because that's how we're taught to think, manage expectations, in quotes. Managing expectations is the quickest way to stifle growth. If you're always managing expectations, because we can't handle disappointment. Of course we can. But if we never think that we can actually do something big, we're never going to do it. It doesn't just happen. Like if you actually don't believe it, then like you got to really know, like, I'm going to go for it. You got to dream big you got to dream crazy for crazy things to happen, And so I set the intention in that November, and I said, okay, I said a prayer, and I said, one day I hope to have like that what I'm meant to be doing comes to me, that I understand what it is that I'm meant to be doing in this life, and that I have the courage to go for it. Real courage to go for it, because I understood even then that whatever this thing was going to take all of a leap of faith. That's what it was going to be. It was going to be a leap of faith. And I let that go. July. Then I won't go into July 2020 yet. I'll piece it. So then now in between this like 2020 time, it's a little bit later in 2020. I start to have some pretty like mysterious things start to happen. Like every time, and this is now, I never experienced this before, but when I was on, I would take mushrooms, I'd be in the bathroom, and without question, suddenly, I would always like, I'd be there alone. I would feel like hands touching me, little hands like this, like just lightly all over my skin, down my legs, everywhere. And it would like startle me, like very physically. I'm like, what the fuck is happening to me right now? And I would look down at my arms and my hair would be standing up the whole way. I was like, okay. And I was like, it never felt scary to me, but it startled me. You know, like the energy that I felt was like loving, but it was kind of like
vulnerable. I mean,
yeah, very vulnerable because I'm naked, literally, like I'm in the bathroom, and like usually I was wearing like a bodysuit. That's why. So like it was always like I'd wear like this. I was through a phase of wearing lots of bodysuits. So like to use like you have to take it all the way off, and so I would just be feeling like fingertips like running down all of my body. I was like, well, this is something. And I remember I would tell my friend who was there, and I was like, every time I'm alone, I feel like hands lightly touching me. And I was like, okay, this is pretty wild. And I remember it happening again. I had another friend of mine. This is like a different time. I'm in the bathroom and she's in there and I'm feeling it happening to me. I don't say anything to her because I'm like, I'm not gonna like tell her that I'm like feeling like I'm being touched right now. Like I like let it be there. This other friend was also like, I consider her very, very, she's like, has so many gifts. She's like very telepathic and just really like an otherworldly kind of being. And she goes, there's like 6 lights. Like there's 6, like she like on it. She freaked out a little bit. She's like, in a good way. She's like, I'm not even going to come in there right now. She's like, I like just see like 6 beings around you. And I was like, cool, because I've been feeling something for the past. I was like, really? Because at this time, like, I'm not, this is not, that was to me, I was like the coolest thing I've ever heard. I was like, really? But it was like, it went on, and there was times that like we saw, honestly, we've seen like darker spirits as well. And I don't always talk about that because I don't want to scare people. But at the same time, I think it's worth mentioning that during a psychedelic, you can encounter anything, really, anything. And like, okay, how do I describe this? I'm sorry. Like, okay, for instance, one of the times, like I was with a friend and we were having an amazing time, and we felt like I can always feel like very nauseous when I feel something is off in the room, and suddenly there was like shaking at our door. We're in a hotel room with a bolted lock, like it doesn't open. All of a sudden, it's like shaking. We look at the door, and the whole thing opens on its own. It opens, and we both see like a black smoke figure. And then we immediately go over. There's nothing there. There's no one around. We shut it. And I was just like, okay. And things like that happened like a few other times where like we would see things. It also happened in good ways. Like we would see, I wouldn't see as much from like, it's actually easier for me to see like visibly with dark. Like I could see like black smoke or like basically like the apparition of something and be like, what in the fuck? And we're all seeing it. It's not like one of us where I'm just like, I'm making it up. Like we're all having a joint shared experience of something that is not, does not fit inside the parameter of what is a normal experience.
But everyone's under the influence of
we
mushrooms
are, yes, we're all under
together in a space.
Exactly. And so that is absolutely like part of that for sure. I mean, for me, I guess my truth, and I would never make this truth for someone else, but for me, when I take a psychedelic, it is the experience of me of the veil lowering.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm making this up. And we all happen to be having a shared dream at this moment of seeing the same exact thing. Like, sure, I guess, but there's not, I guess it's in my truth, and that there was something very, that there's more than what meets the eye, the more that we can understand. The inexplicable is very real, at least for myself.
When you say the veil, what you're alluding to is this thing that separates us from what we normally consider to be the normal experience of being a human being on this planet.
Yeah, like the spirit realm, the invisible realms, but like that you sense it, you feel it, but you can't see it. We can't measure it yet.
Yeah.
There's no like tool for that, but just after enough experiences, you're just kind of like, and it's not only on psychedelic now. The big mystical experience I had, and this is the one where it's very hard to describe because it was just a thing that happened, but I had these like like apparition type things, and still in my mind, I never really felt the level of like confirmation in quotes.
Yeah.
Right. There was still some doubt,
Yeah.
even though we're all having something that we can't explain, right? Like, how are we all seeing and feeling the same thing? You know what I mean? Like in the same room, psychedelic or not, why are we having the same experience? You know what I mean? That feels very real, that affected us after. And so, but regardless, there was still a little bit of that. And so when, sorry, I'll get back to there. So I'm at this show. We're with a bunch of people. We're with our friends. There's about 12 of us. And a friend of mine starts to have a really difficult time on a psychedelic at this point. I want to also mention, when I'm tripping, you probably wouldn't know. Like, I'm very sharp, like very sharp, very like, I used to actually want to record trip on this on mushrooms because I was like, my flow state is usually so dialed on it. But just to give context, I'm not just like, woo, like on the floor, like you wouldn't know. Okay. Even if I had an eighth of mushrooms in front of you, you'd probably be like, are you tripping? I'd be like, definitely. But so she's having a tough time. She's somebody who is prone to that. And this happens again. She starts looping, going kind of in a dark direction. And I start to say things to her. I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but like, I recalled I didn't have a lot of thought. I was just kind of like speaking. We end up going back in the studio, and I continue to just speak to her until she says to me, she goes, Kat, I'm talking to her, by the way. I don't know her very well. I've only met her a couple times. She was the assistant to my friend. I started talking to her about her childhood, about like certain instances that had happened, ways that like, that she, like that self and this self are connecting and all of this stuff. And she finally goes to me, she goes, Kat, how do you know exactly what to say to me? And in that moment, I was like, it was like, there's no words actually for what I can describe what happened. But I took a beat and I said, oh, it's so interesting. I don't think it was me. I have no idea what I even just said to you. I have no idea. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, she goes, okay, you always have good advice. You always know what to say. I was like, no, I know. And I was like, not only could I not tell you what I just said, I have no, like, the few things that I did remember, I'm like, I don't know anything about you. I was like, no, like really, like I was like, and I'm trying to now explain this to someone who's not spiritual. I'm like, and I'm having the experience myself, trying to like unpack. I'm like, no, I'm like receiving it. It's the best way I could describe it was like, there's two funnels of information now. Yeah. The thoughts going like, what's happening here? And then just this like unknowing, just a knowing, like just like a download of information that I was like, it was speaking through me. I was just like a conduit of the information. And that continued throughout the night where I was like watching this show, and it was like, it was like tapping me on the shoulder. I had light like flashing kind of like in my face. It said, you need to tell your other friend this. You need to say this. And I said one thing to him, the craziest part is that what I had said to him, I basically said, your happiness, you're in charge of your own happiness. And I'm not going to go into what that means, but it was a very loaded thing for me to say, and a very loaded thing to be guided to say. I made the mistake then of like kind of Kat then went in and tried to interpret what that meant. It ended up becoming like a straight up divine intervention. That night, I started weeping later because I was having like such an otherworldly experience of information. And every time I go to the restroom, when I was not even in the restroom, just alone, I had the physical feeling, nobody can see me if I'm talking, of like literally getting like moved, like entered, like a magnetic force that would push me back. And like, I would just like receive, like, it felt like just pressure right in my heart center. And at other times it would like move me. Like I was not moving myself. All I can say is like, Kat wasn't moving me. Something else was moving me. And I was just like, this is so beyond. And then from that point on, that channel has been open ever since.
It's an amazing anecdote for us to have to conclude on today.
Totally.
But we've opened up the conversation for another good jumping off point, I think, for next time, because I think it would be fun to explore some of these anecdotes further with you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be open and vulnerable, not only in this moment today with me, but in the work that you're doing with Trip on this podcast. And I'm sure you'll continue to exhibit those qualities and anything else that you get into. But again, I think anybody who's listening and watching this appreciates hearing the details and the honest, your willingness to be honest and just vulnerable. So thank you for sharing that. And if people want to check out Trip on This, that's still happening for you and will be for some time. Come back and speak to me again, please, Kat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. First time I've talked about any of this kind of stuff. So it was fun to get into. Thank you so much.